Thank you, Bob. It's great to be here in Oakbrook Terrace tonight. This was my childhood home away from home. I spent more time in this town than I did in my own hometown of Westmont at times. I'm amazed at the attendance here tonight, especially with this weather. You know, this is just fabulous. It's a testament to all the popularity of our business over the years. I just want to mention one thing before I get started. I'm not a professional speaker or a writer. I do, however, enjoy writing, but I have a bad case of glossophobia, the fear of public speaking. I do not have a lot of experience with public speaking, but have improved somewhat, in my opinion, over the years. And on top of that, I'm fighting the tail end of a cold, so I might be coughing a little bit, but I'll do the best I can. But I do appreciate any understanding you could give me. I was asked by Bob Shanahan, Executive Director of the Oakbrook Terrace Historical Society, if I was willing to do this. I did not want to let him down and the rest of the amazing staff of volunteers. So I agreed at the same time. I knew this was a great opportunity to share our family business history to the residents of this fine community, as well as others from all over the Chicago area, and even some out-of-staters that I heard were attending tonight. I feel like it's our obligation to all the persons that made our business so successful all those years. I plan on discussing a little about the history of the family and the business and share a few of my many stories that include the good times and the bad times, the joys and the tragedies, and some even with humor, and follow up with a session of questions and answers. This will be very difficult to accomplish due to time constraints. Trying to fit just a sample of the 66 years of info in about 66 minutes is going to be tough. There's so much info that I could literally talk for 66 hours straight. No exaggeration. And besides, with my glossophobia, I would never make it that far. I have done my best to pick and choose some info and stories to share. I also want to discuss the exhibit next door. This also started back in 2008 when the city contacted us about loaning any memorabilia we had for a display during their 50th anniversary celebration at the Park District facilities. They thought we would have a few items to fill a table they had set up in the hallway. When my brothers Randy and Bryce and I brought in several carloads, they quickly realized the table would not suffice and put us into one of the racquetball rooms with several tables, which we used a good portion of. I know that the city was in the process of starting to form a historical society and working on acquiring a location to use as their museum. The following year, in 2009, our family started a website, www.dispensascastleoftoys.com or dispensaskiddykingdom.com, to share the history of our business with the public. It has been a very popular site as former customers, employees, friends, and relatives have left thousands of comments on there over the years. Then in 2015, my fellow board member at the Westmont Area Historical Society, the curator of our Westmont Greg's House Museum, Alice Krampitz, asked me if I could display a few of my personal items in the museum for several months, which I did, as well as give a short presentation such as today, but in a much smaller, shorter, intimate setting at our Park District. But we still had about 50 visitors, which made it one of our highest attended events. Our community of Westmont was home to several business family members, as well as a lot of our thousands of former employees, many who were childhood friends and neighbors of ours, as well as home to many of our customers. As I knew the 100th anniversary of the business founding was approaching in 2019, I wanted to possibly put on some kind of display somewhere, but was so busy with other things in my life, I didn't really have a chance to plan anything out. But then came Elmhurst Historical Museum to the rescue. I noticed on social media they had planned a huge event entitled Worlds of Wonder. It was a summer-long project about the lost amusement parks of the Chicago area. They hosted several events with guest speakers and even had a mini carnival one day. The exhibit was attended by thousands. They are staffed by an incredible crew and are a top-notch suburban museum. They researched an incredible amount of info about the amazing history of over 50 former amusement parks that once stood in the city of Chicago and the suburbs. Some as little as just a couple rides to mega parks. I learned so much there. The curator of exhibits, Dan Bartlett, put a public request out for any memorabilia that could be loaned to them, including our Kiddie Kingdom. A smile started on my face. I replied to him with a comment that sort of meant, no need to search anymore because you just hit gold. So after dealing with so many problems, issues, and activities in our lives, this year my wife and I were able to put a small sample of our Kiddie Kingdom collection together to add to the great display they constructed. I want to thank the volunteer museum staff here, Bob, Debbie, Ave, Anthony, Liz, Tim, and Kelly, for treating myself and the rest of my family like royalty and for their amazing work, including the wonderful media display. They even presented me with my own special personalized museum shirt. Before the Elmhurst exhibit was even closed, I received an email from their executive director, Dave Oberg, mentioning that Bob visited the event and asked if he could borrow some of their display in our memorabilia to put into the museum here immediately after. Elmhurst graciously loaned some of their items to him, After Bob and I made contact with each other, I mentioned to him that my plans were to eventually contact the society about doing some type of event like this. I told him I would be honored to do so, but asked him if I could possibly have more time to prepare for this. There was so much we owned that it would be nice if we could expand it to more than a few items. So again, my wife and I worked hard in the last couple months trying to organize our artifacts. Bob told me that Oakbrook Terrace may be small, but they dream big. When I heard he was able to get Villa Park resident Rocky Hayes to graciously agree to transport and erect the 2 soldiers that he owned, part of our original fleet of 8, I thought, well, there aren't many things bigger to dream about than those. Thank you, Rocky, and good job, Bob. I hope you can get to visit the museum across the street. Can't miss it. Just look for the giant red and blue smiling armed guardians. Most of the items belong to myself and my wife, Dawn, as well as our children, Amber and John IV. There are also some items from my brother Randy's collection as well, and some other family members, local residents, and friends. We could not possibly exhibit our entire collection. As gracious as they were here, temporarily moving out other unrelated displays to allow us to have the entire main room and part of other room. Even if we had the entire building, it would still not be enough for it all. There's a lot in there, but it's just a large sample of our collection. We own several hundred items and several thousand pictures. When I think of all the millions of pictures that were taken of the business all those years, my family and especially customers, it makes me cringe that we never invested in stock with Kodak or Polaroid. I have several ideas for possible future projects related to our business history that I can't discuss tonight, but some will include Elmhurst and Oakbrook Terrace's historical societies. So please visit the museum if you haven't already, and if you have, do it again. We already have added more items since opening day and may continue to, as the last few days come to an end. And please consider making a donation to the museum, which will be used for the future so they can continue displaying the great history of this great community. Just a little info about me. I never was one of our family business owners, but I was born and grew up in the business. I was born at Elmhurst Hospital on November 30, 1960. I lived about 3 years in Hinsdale with my parents and mother's parents in my mother's parents' house. Eventually, my father designed and actually built part of our house in Westmont, where I grew up with 2 younger brothers, until I was 24 and married Dawn Marie Valerio. The 2 of us rented an apartment in Darien for about 2 years before purchasing a house back in Westmont. I had been married to Dawn for 34 years, and we were blessed with a daughter, Amber Marie, in 1987, and a son, John IV, in 1990, as well as a granddaughter, Isabella Marie, in 2016. As you can tell, I have an interest in local history, and I also enjoy sports history. So we thought it was only fitting that we continue to promote our family business history by going on tour, so to speak, with our memorabilia. To complement their website, my Uncle Nicholas, Uncle Nick, as we called him, who was the last surviving owner until he passed away last year, was our unofficial historian for many years, as he wrote a lot about the family and the business. So we were just committed to carrying on the tradition of the rich history of the Dispensa business. I experienced a childhood and early adulthood in the carnival, amusement park, and toy selling industries. I have so many memories and experiences during those years, the first half of my life, that I could not possibly share them all with you tonight. But I hope I can give you a sample of what it was like. So buckle up those lap belts and pull down those safety bars as I take you on a ride through the Dispensa business empire. I thought I would start you off with one of my personal stories. It's my favorite of all the many I have, so I wanted to make sure I told it early tonight in case I run out of time for all the stories I hope to share. The Lord blessed me with 3 princesses in my life: my wife, Dawn, my daughter, Amber, and my granddaughter, Isabella. If I was a doll designer, I would create one with her in mind. I could sell a ton. She's such a cutie. And soon I will have a 4th. Isabella is eagerly awaiting a baby sister next year, Olivia. I have names or titles for some of my stories, including this one. I call it How I Met My First Princess. Back in May of 1982, when I was 21, and still a college student, and working in Kiddie Kingdom as a supervisor, I was helping get the park ready to open one day. I found out we had several new employees starting that day, and I needed to be trained in operating the rides. At that time, I was experienced enough from so many years of riding the rides as a child, literally thousands of times, and several years of operating the rides, that I could operate or train someone on any of the rides we owned. So as we had our usual informal family daily pre-opening meeting, I found out I was going to train one of them on our antique pony cart children's ride. So I noticed the employees walk in, and one of them caught my eye. Another college student, very attractive and beautiful hair down to her waist. I thought to myself, wow. Then a few minutes later, my father calls me over to where he was sitting on one of the benches, getting ready to delegate what rides the new employees were going to be trained on. Now, keep in mind, I was a shy child, and it actually carried over a bit into my early adult years. but I was outgrowing that, but I never felt comfortable discussing certain things with my parents, especially girls. Also, as a child, I was called Johnny most of the time. A lot of family members and some of my childhood friends still do. When my father was born, he was referred to as Little Johnny because they now had to call my grandfather Big Johnny. But when I was born, it got confusing, so they called me Little Johnny. And I was little. So my father said to me, "Johnny, did you see the new employees walk in?" I said, "Yes, I did." He said, "Did you happen to notice that one?" As he pointed towards one of them, it was that same girl. Again, I said, "Yes, I did." Then he said, "She's really cute, don't you think?" I put my head down and muttered, "Yes, Dad, can I go now?" So I walked away, and then a few minutes later, he tells me that I was training a girl named Dawn. I said, "Okay, which one is she?" Again, he pointed. It was that same girl. I said, "Okay," and walked away. Did not actually say this, but I thought to myself, yes! Then it hit me. I was just set up. My father just set me up. So I trained Dawn on the pony cart ride that day. I was very professional, didn't discuss any personal things, just business. When the day was over, my father asked me how she was. I told him she was great, very attentive, very safety aware, great personality, and loves kids. All the qualities we dream of in our employees. She was one of the best I ever trained. And of course, it was all true. So the next day he tells me, since Dawn did such a fantastic job, she should be okay by herself. He wanted me to train somebody else on a different ride. I then said, "Okay, but you know what? There may be a couple of small details I forgot to mention to her. Maybe I should stay with her another day." He said, "No, I need you somewhere else." So as the next few days went by, I was able to train her on several other rides, and we had the opportunity to chat a bit when we shared break times. Another little trick I think my father secretly arranged. I quickly realized that we had a connection that I never experienced before. I felt her inner attractiveness as well. After just a few weeks, I asked her out on a date. She accepted. I had a simple dinner and movie planned. A few days before the date, we chose to go out. She mentioned to me, "My father's a huge White Sox fan. He has season tickets from his employer. He wants to know if we would like the tickets for that night. I know you are a huge baseball fan." I said, "Oh, yes, a great idea." So on June 21, 1982, we watched the White Sox defeat the Minnesota Twins 5-4 at Comiskey Park. I still have that ticket framed in our house. The next year we were engaged, and then on April 20, 1985, we were married, and we lived happily ever after. Some family history and the business history. Keep in mind there were several family members with the same name over the generations. And the original name was Dispensa with a Z. It was changed to sound more American. Several Johns, Nicholases, Josephs, Pauls, and others, so it can get confusing. The Dispensa business was started by Nicholas Salvatore Dispensa Sr., my great-grandfather, who I do remember a little, along with his cousin, also with the same name, Nicholas. Nicholas Sr., NS as he was often referred to, lived from 1888 to 1970. He immigrated with his parents, Joseph and Sabita, my great-great-grandparents, at the age of 5, from the small village of Termini and Marisi on the island of Sicily, a suburb of Palermo. His father, Joseph, and 4 brothers also eventually immigrated here. Nicholas Sr. had 3 siblings. All of them died as very young children. In 1904, he married as a teen to Rose Dispensa, my great-grandmother, who was actually a distant cousin, and had 9 children with her, 5 sons and 4 daughters, over a span of 29 years. Nicholas Sr.'s first job here was with the railroad. He was the first Italian immigrant in the USA to have the opportunity to help operate a real train engine. He later opened up a shoe shop in Chicago with Rose, where they made and sold shoes. Eventually, he purchased a truck and was hired to use it for transporting dug-up soil from the newly constructed buildings to the lakefront as landfill. While he was still operating the shoe shop, one of his sons, John Sr., my grandfather, who lived from 1912 to 1994, started to help his parents in the shoe shop. When Nicholas Sr. was approximately 30, he got a job with his cousin Nicholas in the circus band. There was a Ferris wheel at the circus that they noticed was always very busy before and after the circus. So the 2 of them decided to purchase a Ferris wheel in 1919 and booked with another circus that moved from town to town on a train. So the next year, after they realized the difficulty and expenses of transporting and operating the wheel, whether by train, truck, or horse and wagon, the cousin Nicholas decided he did not want to continue. So in 1920 and 1921, my great-grandfather, determined to make a success of the business, hooked up with another carnival and went on a tour through Missouri and Illinois. Then in 1923, he brought the wheel to Michigan, where a dance hall booked him to run it for the summer. In 1926, when John Sr. was 14, he started a fruit peddling business during the carnival off-season. Eventually, his father and 2 of his brothers, Joseph Sr. and Paul Sr., joined him and were making more money with that than they were with the carnivals. They lived and operated both of their businesses in Chicago near Chinatown, eventually moving the wheel with them to another Chicago location. Eventually, the three sons persuaded their father to expand the carnival company by purchasing rides from other failed carnival companies. It quickly grew tremendously, and by the time the 1930s came around, we were operating 4 carnivals at once with a fleet of about 50 trucks. We moved the residence and business to Hinsdale. They lived and operated out of the building at 19 East Chicago, which still stands there today. We also had a large barn-type building near York and Ogden where we stored a lot of the equipment. John Sr. was married to Prudence, my grandmother. They had 4 children born in the 1930s and 1940s. 2 girls, Louise and Mary, who was my godmother, and 2 boys, Nicholas Anthony and John Jr., my father, who lived from 1939 to 1986. And if our family tree wasn't complicated enough already, John Sr.'s brother, Joe Sr., was married to Prudence's sister, Florence, who made the best darn Sicilian pizza I ever ate. In the 1940s, the carnival industry went through major changes. Permits, sponsors, and other changes were making it more difficult to operate a carnival. One major reason was game and tent companies had a lot of say as to who and what they wanted to work with. So the Dispensa decided to separate ourselves from that and develop our own tent and game company to go along with the carnivals. So we took advantage of that and designed and built several new types of tents that were far better than the previous types, and in the process revolutionized the carnival tent industry. Now most tents you see are built with the same specifications that we created. Shortly after, John Sr. designed and with his brothers built an innovative type of bingo trailer to replace the bingo tents. It was the first of its kind anywhere in the world. Eventually, we also designed and built trailers to operate the games out of, so some of the tents could be eliminated to cut down on manpower and valuable time that it took to set up and tear down and transport the games, also unknown to the industry. In 1948, we started getting involved in the merchandise business, as that type of home-style appliances such as fans, mixers, electric coffee makers, and dozens of other items were requested by the public as prizes in the games, never attempted before in the carnival business. Then the family decided to conquer the next challenge, food. We got our feet wet in the snack food such as popcorn, cotton candy, snow cone, and peanuts. That was one of the few areas that already existed, but we continued to develop new and better ways. The popcorn trailers were basically run by the women of the family, wives, daughters, daughter-in-laws, and eventually granddaughters. There were 2 names that were being used at this time as the identifying company brand, Dispensa's Amusement Enterprises and Dispensa's Merchandising Company. In 1951, the name was changed to Dispensa & Sons Complete Carnivals. It was at this time that the name Dispensa & Sons Incorporated was first used. As the years progressed, so did the carnival industry, namely due to the inventions and improvements that the family continued to create. With John Sr. being the catalyst with his incredible ideas, he was an engineering and a mechanical genius. All 3 boys never graduated elementary school as they were needed to work in the business. John Sr. suffered from severe dyslexia, a condition that was not understood back then. So did so many famous successful persons, including but not limited to Steven Spielberg, Steve Jobs, Charles Schwab, and even some of the world's greatest minds, such as Richard Branson, Leonardo da Vinci, Thomas Edison, and even Albert Einstein. He wrote an autobiography later in life with the help of one of his sons, Nicholas, since he never learned to read or write, which he titled The Dumb One. He named it that because the kids would call him dumb as in stupid. We have on display in the museum an original copy of it. I remember so often he would ask me and other grandchildren if they could read or write things for him. He eventually was taught to write his name, but he knew how to dream, design, engineer, and build things like no other in the industry. He devised a way to take the first portable roller coaster ever produced, the Allen Herschel Little Dipper, which we owned and which was my most favorite ride as a child, and permanently mounted to a platform trailer which was quicker and easier to set up, tear down, and transport. What originally required 6 men 8 hours to do now only required 2 men and 2 hours. It was now the first trailer-mounted roller coaster in the world. And it was just beginning. In the 1960s, the 3 brothers continued to look for ways to cut down the manpower, the hours required, the level of difficulty of setting up, tearing down, and transporting the rides, which inevitably led to cost savings. All of the family owners over the years were incredible laborers. They had all the knowledge and skills to perform all necessary work on their equipment, whether it be plumbing, electrical, painting, carpentry, masonry, HVAC, welding, anything. They could do it all and did do it all. The company saved a ton of money with that ability for not having to hire others to do the work. For example, my father one day may be working on welding a trailer together for a new game, then go outside and operate a backhoe to put in the drainage pipes in the lot of our store, then get cleaned up and go inside to be a salesman in the store. As the years went on, we also trailer-mounted an octopus ride, never been done before. And John Sr. wanted a way to better load and transport a merry-go-round, so he designed some changes on the truck to better accomplish that. Then he wanted a better type of trailer to load, unload, and transport the carnival tents. There were only 2 types of semi-trailers at the time, Neither one was perfect, so we designed a trailer that incorporated both types, a hybrid. This time, instead of building one ourselves, he went to the trailer manufacturer with the plans and asked them to build one for us. They told him it was impossible. That was all my grandfather ever had to hear from anybody. It was like throwing fuel on a fire. You never told him anything was impossible. I can personally vouch for that. Several times as a young boy when I was helping him, I commented to him that I could not perform a certain job. I would say, "Grandpa, I just can't do it that. It's impossible." You would think the world just came to an end. The ground parted and the floodwaters came in. It showed me how wrong I was. So he told them to find a way to build the trailer, or he will do it himself. They found the way. And the moving industry caught wind of this new type of trailer that they wanted for years, but nobody could build. It didn't take long, and all the furniture moving companies started to order trailers like that and are still being used on the roads today. But the pride and joy of the family business innovations was when we took a scrambler and with John Sr.'s design mounted it on a trailer. The three sons built this amazing achievement, the world's first trailer-mounted scrambler. The scrambler was manufactured by the famous Big Eli Bridge Company, who also manufactured the Ferris wheels. When we invited the Big Eli executives to our business to show them our achievement, they were amazed. They told us that they had requested their several engineers over several years that they paid a lot of money to come up with one of those. They never could. They said we were in the wrong business of operating rides. Rather, we should be manufacturing the rides. With our plans we gave them, they quickly started to build them. But that brings up a good point. If our family could devise all these improvements to the carnival and amusement industry, why didn't we pursue that ability to reap financial rewards down the road in that area? The answer may not be easy to comprehend, but it was simple. All we wanted was a way to improve our business. We may not have had all the foresight that you would think we should have, but we really did not have an interest or time to pursue that path. It was one of our many contributions to the industry. I have the original letter from Big Eli to us thanking us for showing them the way to achieving what they thought was the impossible. Unfortunately, when you read their company history books, we were never even mentioned. But going back a few years into the 1950s, while the carnivals were still prospering, the realization of needing a way to clear out that summer's remaining carnival merchandise to make room for next year's new merchandise was evident. So while still in a Hinsdale location on Chicago Avenue, we started the next edition of the business, retail sales. Only we tried something that did not exist anywhere in the retail world, discount prices. Now you see discount stores of all kinds. It was a huge success and one of the keys to the prosperity of our new branch of business. It was around that time that my great-grandfather decided it was time to retire, and two of his other sons, Anthony and Nicholas Jr., that joined the business many years after the original three brothers started, decided to leave the business. Property was bought in what was unincorporated Elmhurst, which eventually became years later Oakbrook Terrace, which was originally named Utopia for 1 year, at 83 in Butterfield, right down the road, in the 1950s, and a building was started in 1951 that our family actually built ourselves. It was used as the warehouse for the carnival rides and trucks, and in 1956 an addition was added which included an office and a store to sell the merchandise. It became more successful as the years went on. Some of my first memories of the business were in that store, including the photo shoot in the office with one of my brothers and two of my cousins when I was 2. We were covered with toys all around us. The picture was used in the store catalog. In another year, the same type of picture was used. We have that first original picture in the museum. It was the beginning and the end of my modeling career. I didn't get paid a dime. Maybe I received one of the toys, I'm not sure about that. But I also remember at age 2 when my father brought me into the building on a day the business was closed. He told me he had to check the store for something. He told me to go sit in the chair by the desk that had the aquarium with the snails on it and watch the snails. He would be right back. So I climbed up in the chair and looked in the aquarium, but with no luck finding any snails. Then I noticed a hole in the top of the aquarium and looked up and saw several snails upside down creeping along the ceiling. I freaked out, ran through the doors of the office into the store yelling, "Daddy, Daddy, the snails are loose, the snails are loose." Okay, one more story right now. I call this one Man versus Machine. Back around the early 1970s, I believe, I was maybe 12 or 13. I was at our Glen Ellen Carnival, which was held in a parking lot along the railroad tracks near downtown. I spent pretty much all day on the roller coaster, just kept riding it over and over. So eventually I got bored. Imagine that, a kid getting bored at a carnival. At the time, I was really starting to develop a very competitive attitude with anything, but especially sports. I was just starting to get involved in running cross-country in junior high and continued with that all the way through college, where I also competed in that as well as other sports. So I convinced my brother Randy to race the roller coaster with me. I knew exactly how long it took to complete a lap because I rode it so often. So we lined up on the blacktop, which was in bad shape, with a lot of broken pieces and pebble-sized gravel all over. The coaster started, we started, got almost completely around the first turn as I glanced back to see it on my shoulder. But I was still confident and determined to beat it. Then my feet went out from underneath me, and I fell on all that gravel with shorts on. My brother landed on top of me. I was in terrible pain as I got up and realized we got passed up by the coaster. I attempted to finish, but it was more like a hobble than a run. I was extremely mad that I got beat. I looked down at my knees and noticed that the left one was gushing blood. I thought, well, if I live through this, my parents are going to kill me anyway. So somehow my brother helps me get into one of the carnival trailers that was being used by the JCs as an office. My mother and father eventually get located, and they see my knee and determine I need to get to the hospital. So my mother brings me to Winfield Hospital. I believe now it's called Central DuPage. We are in the emergency room. The nurse comes out and sees my injury and asks what happened. I told her the story. She said she was going to have a difficult time cleaning my knee due to all the gravel embedded in it. So I told her to hurry up because I wanted to get back to race the coaster again. She gave me this weird look and said to me, that wasn't a good idea. So I fought the tears back as she scrubbed the wound with alcohol. Then a doctor comes in and asks what happened. Again, I had to explain the story. He examined the wound and said to my mother, Mrs. Dispensa, that is a huge hole in his knee. I'm a great doctor, but I'm not sure I can completely close up that with just stitches. I can fit a golf ball in it. I may have to skin graft. Then I interrupted and said, excuse me, what's a skin graft? He explained that it's when they remove some skin from another part of your body where is not so needed, like a thigh or more likely a buttock, and put it in the wound to hopefully get it to regenerate. So there is not an open space anymore. I said, wait a minute. You're telling me you want to cut off some of my butt and put it in my knee? He said, basically that was it. I said, oh, no. Nobody's touching my butt, and especially nobody's cutting skin off my butt. I would rather do the golf ball option. He said he was kidding about that. I said, I know, but I would still rather do the golf ball. So I pleaded with my mother, Mom, please don't agree to that, please. She sort of shrugged her shoulders, not knowing what to do. Then she looked directly in my eyes and saw my fear and said, my son is not old enough to make those decisions himself. Do the best you can without the grafting. Thank you, Mom. I love you, Mom. I told him to do work fast because I had to get back to race the coaster again. So he had my knee numbed up and went to work. When he was done, he said that he was happy. It worked better than he thought. Happy than he thought it would. He said I would have a big scar there for the rest of my life, which is true. I still have a scar there. But I should be fine. Then he says to my mother, keep an eye on this kid. No more coaster racing. So my mother brings me back and sits me on a chair with one leg extended, all bandaged up. She says, don't you dare get up. I'm watching you. In the meantime, I could see and hear the coaster. I was going nuts. But the day came when I got my revenge. A couple months later, after my knee was healed, I was at one of the carnivals with a coaster. Only this time it was set up on the grass. I challenged it and beat it. I was finally relieved. Back to more history. Early in the 1960s, we were informed by the state of Illinois that they had plans to expand Route 83 and put in a new huge interchange at our corner. It would require declaring eminent domain, which is simply selling your property to the government for the current market value, with or without your consent, to further the development of needed roads or buildings. They were purchasing half of our property, 12.5 acres, the west half. We purchased the 25 acres when it was a prairie for $25,000. Can't buy a median on a highway for that now. The area was very quickly growing due to the Oakbrook Center stores and other reasons, including our own popularity. So it was like we shot ourselves in the foot. But as fate would have it, we decided we were not going to let that destroy us. On the contrary, we were going to turn that disadvantage into an advantage. It was about that time anyway, the family was discussing expanding our store. Customers were frequently requesting more toys than we currently had. Then the idea of a giant toy store like no other was the solution. It could be built on the remaining eastern half of the property. So the three sons and now the two grandsons started to let their imagination run wild. Joe Sr. was the first to mention the idea of a castle of some type. After much debate, my grandfather was working one day in that first store here called Discount City. He started doodling, not on a napkin, but on scratch paper. He drew a castle that was a Bavarian type. A copy of that piece of paper is on display in the museum. It was the first rendition of what became the Castle of Toys. So then he took that drawing to the architect, asked him if he could professionally design a building like that. He sort of chuckled and said, sure. Then after a couple months went by, he revisited him and asked him how the plans were going. He was told he thought it was just a dream and John Sr. was not serious. John Sr. told him he was serious and it was a dream, but the Dispensas make dreams come true. Start working on it now, he told him. The architect was Otto Nerad. I fondly remember him and his wife. It was the beginning of a close family friendship for all of us that lasted for several decades. So while still waiting for the state to follow through on their plans, which actually took about 10 years to complete, after the plans were designed, we were already under construction with a new store. It took a few years, but in 1967 it opened to the public. It was a landmark that stood for only 18 years, but the impact it had on so many persons was royal. It consisted of 80,000 square feet, with eventually 40,000 feet used as the sales area and several towers, which one reached a height of 75 feet from just the base alone, not including the 2 stories under it. The roof and the towers were sort of the forbidden land when my brothers and I were young. It was not really designed to handle a lot of foot traffic. The towers were actually very dangerous, but that didn't stop us boys from sneaking away every once in a while and climbing the inside of the towers on a very small attached ladder, all the way to the windows to look out. We must have been crazy when I look back now, but as they say, boys will be boys. It was the world's largest independent freestanding toy store, but it was also the world's coolest fort to us. It was built at the cost of $1 million. I can only guess what a structure like that would cost today. It consisted of 3 levels. The basement and 3rd floors were warehouse floors where all the toys were stored before they hit the shelves. The 2nd floor, the ground floor, was the store floor. We also had an attached office with 2 floors. And there was an apartment in the front on the upper floor where my great-uncle Paul Sr. lived until he moved out, and my grandparents lived in it for a few years. When we knew the castle was going to be torn down, it was about the time we were getting married, and my grandparents just moved out. We were given the opportunity to live in there after our marriage for a few months until it was torn down. We turned it down because we thought it would be just too difficult to move stuff in there, then a few months later, move out. And besides, we were looking for a possible house. But now as we look back, it was one of the most regrettable decisions we ever made. We opened up a hobby department that contained items such as trains, cars, rockets, dolls, and more. Then eventually we consolidated the office space by moving it up a floor so we could open up our next project, the Royal Nursery. We sold baby furniture, strollers, and many other baby-related items. John Sr. designed a unique type of tilted shelving unit that we built and installed to display the toys in a better fashion than a traditional way. Sales started to skyrocket. Other corporations took notice, and shortly after, stores like Toys R Us and Child World sprang up. Child World even copied our design somewhat and used turrets on their stores. The business was growing tremendously. One of the reasons for our success was we were able to purchase directly from the manufacturers due to the high volume of toys that we sold, as opposed to a wholesaler who didn't require a lot of volume purchasing. So we were able to buy at a lower cost and in turn sell at a lower cost, and the public ate it up. Sales increased every year, and the profits were used to expand the company even further as we got into our own wholesale division and mail order division. We had the biggest media advertising campaign anywhere, with daily radio and television commercials on all the major stations and hundreds of print advertising in all the papers and magazines. We also would have the news stations filming as we were revving up for the holiday season. Hundreds of articles written about the business over the years. We were the sole sponsor of WGN-TV's annual Family Classic Thanksgiving show, and we had the famous Castle of Toys jingle. And I will not attempt to even sing it tonight, so don't even think of asking me. It's embedded in my brain, partly because I would go to school and all of my classmates would start singing it almost every day to me. I would say, "Come on, guys, give it a rest." Looking back now, I realize how special that was. Now, a little info about some famous personalities. So eventually the state completed the interchange, and prior to that, in 1971, we had our original buildings, which also included a tent storage barn type of shed, torn down. At that time, the castle was really a huge success. We hired so many personalities as promotions during the holidays. TV, movie, and radio stars, athletes, etc. Some of the most famous and most recognized were the WGN actors. Ned Locke as Ringmaster Ned, Ray Rayner, Marshall Brodeen as Wizzo, but also as Marshall the Magician, who would demonstrate his TV miracle cards and TV magic cards and promote and sell them. I still have a set of those. And of course, Roy Brown as Cookie the Clown. We have a picture of him on the train in the museum. I got to personally know those guys growing up. Every year they would return and see me and the other great-grandchildren and comment how the Dispensa kids are growing so fast. Roy told me once I was going to pass him up next year. The next year, sure enough, even though I was short when I was getting a small growth spurt, he said, "See, what did I tell you, Johnny? You caught up to me." He was a pretty short guy, but one of the nicest persons I ever met, with no exceptions. When I was old enough, he allowed me to be one-on-one with him as he applied his clown makeup in front of one of the office mirrors as we talked about TV. How many kids can claim that? And Ned Locke was also such a wonderful man. He would love to come into our employee kitchen while my grandmother would be making one of her famous Italian dishes and share lunch with us in costume. But then again, her reputation of a great cook traveled far. Toy salesmen that we would do business with would often stop by during lunchtime just to check on your store, but we knew what they really were there for, to sit in one of my grandmother's meals. She would ask them to join us as they already had a chair pulled out. Then most dear to my heart, athletes. I met and became friends to so many that I possibly could not even come close to naming all of them. Dozens. Bulls players Bob Love, Norm Van Leer, Jerry Sloan, and others, including Tom Borwinkle, who lived in Clarendon Hills. We would run into him sometimes at the Indy 500. He would park his motorhome near ours, and when he started walking down the sidewalk, you couldn't miss him, taller than the trees. I would run up ahead and say hi to him. He would say jokingly, "You Dispensa boys have got to quit following me." Blackhawks such as Cliff Coral, Tony Esposito, and others. Tony was one of my childhood idols. One time at an industry dinner my father brought us boys to in Chicago, they hired athletes as a promotion to split up and each sit at a table. Guess who sits next to me? Tony O. I was on cloud nine. We also had some famous athletes as customers. Another idol of mine was Big 21, Stan the Man Makita. He was an Elmhurst resident that would without fail shop for our model trains every year during the holidays and just chat with my father and us about hockey, model trains, or whatever else was on his mind. He usually would throw down some tickets on the counter and tell my father to take the boys to the game. And also Elmhurst resident Fred Lorenzen, 1965 Daytona 500 winner. A big model train buff that would visit us every year invited us over to his house to see his trophies and train layouts, but unfortunately we never got a chance to do so. One of those trophies is now on display at the Elmhurst Museum. We also got an incredible opportunity to travel to New York City a few times with my father and sometimes uncle or grandparents. My mother would write a letter to our principal asking him for an excused absence to allow us to miss school so we could attend the toy fair shows that were open just to the industry. He would reply back with a comment that said he couldn't think of a better excuse to miss school. So we got a lot of new toy samples to bring home and play with and show our friends before they hit the market. The years we didn't get to go, we would jump on my father as soon as he got home, asking to open his suitcase because we knew it was loaded with new sample toys. We attended events in New York City that again would hire athletes or celebrities to promote the activities. But these just did not have Chicago stars, but national stars such as Roger Staubach, Bart Starr, Joe Namath, Johnny Unitas, Willie Stargell, Billy Williams, Fergie Jenkins, Dick Gordon, Gail Sayers, and so many more. I was mesmerized with all those superstar athletes as we took pictures with them and got their autographs. Even the famous sportscaster Howard Cosell, that guy was everywhere. I saw him so many times I have a stack of his autographed pictures. And the famous car salesman Al Piemonte would come into the castle every year with his wife to buy trains, but also collectible dolls. I've never seen a bigger diamond ring than what he had on. Even the Cubs World Series rings were not as big as his. We also hired Bill Buckner for a promo at Kiddie Kingdom. And Tony La Russa one time came to visit Kiddie Kingdom with his family. He was also a local resident living in various towns near here like Oakbrook, Downers Grove, Westmont, and others. A story about another Blackhawk star, Keith Magnuson. Maggie became an employee with the 7-Up company after retiring from hockey. He was some kind of account rep or executive. I'm not exactly sure what his title was. But I believe he also lived in Elmhurst, but I'm not positive about that. We hired 7-Up as our official soft drink company of the castle and amusement park. So one day he stops by on a day the park was closed. My father pulled out the train and took him and myself on a private train ride. When we were done, he talked to us for a few minutes and asked my father a few questions. He said, "Now, John, tell me the truth. No matter who you say, I will not be offended in any way. Who was your favorite Blackhawk? Tony, Bobby, Stan?" My father said, "You are, Keith." Keith started to smile. Then he asked my father, "What do you like most about hockey? The goals, the fast skating, the great goaltending?" My father said, "The fights. And that's why you are my favorite player, because you are the best damn fighter I've ever seen." Keith laughed so hard that my father took him into the store when it was opened and told all the employees, "This is Keith Magnuson, you know, the fighter." Then brought him into the kitchen to eat one of my grandmother's famous meals with us for lunch. We were also visited by former Governor Dan Walker. I have his autograph on a Castle of Toys postcard. No presidents ever stopped in, but I do remember seeing President Reagan's caravan of helicopters fly over Roosevelt Road when I was working outside as he was heading to the College of DePage from O'Hare. But there is one short story about a local celebrity that used to shop in our store. Michael Butler from the famous Butler family. He would call us every year and ask if he could shop during off hours. I don't know if he just didn't like the crowds or he didn't want to deal with everybody hounding him or what it was, but we would oblige to his request. And after a date was determined, we would make sure a couple employees would stay late after the store closed. So I was there one year with my father when this took place. I was maybe 11 or 12, I think. And after we had all the customers out and the store locked up, we unlocked it for him. He came in cowboy boots and a large brown, possibly fox coat. My father introduced us and asked him if we could take his coat for him. He took it off and threw it on the counter. My father said, "My son Johnny will keep an eye on it for you." Then Michael took a cart and went on his way. My father said to me, "Whatever you do, do not walk away from his coat." So I hung it up on the coat rack, grabbed a chair, and sat, and sat, and sat. I was getting bored. After what seemed like an eternity, he came back with a full cart of toys. I thought, finally. He asked for another cart. I just about went crazy. So I'm sitting there just staring at his coat, watching the clock, thinking, if this guy comes back for another cart, I'm gonna lose it. What can happen here? Nobody's going to steal it. There's no customers and only a couple employees. Is it going to come alive and run down the toy aisles? So finally he comes back, gets his coat, and thanks me and my father, and then gets ready to head to the cashier. He throws down a grant, a $50 bill on the counter, and says, "Thanks for watching my coat, Johnny." I said, "Thanks so much, but I can't accept that." He insisted. So I put it in my pocket. On his way out, I said to him, "Thanks again, Mr. Butler, but when can I expect you back next year?" All right, now the fun time starts. Show and tell. So remember one of these? All right, back in the 80s, we had not only our biggest promotion ever in our toy store, but maybe the biggest anywhere. It was when these Cabbage Patch dolls took the world by storm. This is my daughter's, by the way. It took the world by storm, and I mean the world. It was the biggest doll and possibly toy craze ever. Everybody, and I mean everybody, wanted one, if not more than one. We even had a lady from London call us to ask us if we could ship her one. They were in such high demand that it became a national phenomenon. There were rumors that started about how the manufacturer was purposely holding off production to increase the demand. Not true. They sold $3 million in 1983, and the demand was still overwhelming. No stores could come close to being able to satisfy the demand for several years. Well, that is with one exception, Dispensas. We took a big attempt at it, at least. If you look up at the history of Cabbage Patch dolls, you will find a ton of info. They have evolved over the years and are still being sold today. Some of the older ones are going for thousands on eBay. We were getting the dolls trickling in when the craze started, and of course would sell out in minutes. It got to the point where we didn't even have a chance to put them on the shelves. One time that I remember is after I priced a cartload in the basement and brought them up to the store, I was mobbed by a group of customers. I just abandoned the cart as they attacked it like a bunch of ants discovering a piece of candy. I just walked away. All 24 gone in 1 minute. We had every person imaginable calling us asking for the dolls. Friends that you haven't seen or heard from in years were suddenly friends again. It was one of the most craziest things I ever experienced. So when it got very close to the holiday shopping season, we were able to purchase more than anybody was ever able to. We had several truckloads, hundreds of dolls being shipped to us at once. So naturally, we capitalized on that. We wanted to make sure the shipments arrived before we advertised it. So we had the marketing plan all set, ready to go in advance. The day they arrived, we hit the button and the mass advertising campaign had begun. Newspapers, television, radio. We announced a certain day they would be for sale. Word spread like wildfire. We had to use extra employees to handle all the hundreds of daily phone calls as well as cashiers. We expected thousands of customers to shop on that day. So we prepared with security measures to avoid what was going on in other stores, fights and complete pandemonium. It was common for us to hire a security or a police officer during the holiday season. But for this, we had several. Customers started to arrive the day before as the store was opening, coming in asking if they could purchase one early. When they realized that was not possible, they started to line up outside in the roped-off area we had already put into place. I believe by 5 p.m. they started lining up. It came from all over the Midwest. By the time the doors opened the next morning, there were about 500 persons in line, lined up all the way down the parking lot to the end of the property. We even had some in their cars following trucks into the loading dock, yelling to the drivers, asking if they had one on the truck, expecting to purchase one right there off the dock. After the store closed the night before, as employees started to fill the shelves with the dolls for the next morning, my father, brothers, and I sat in a motorhome all night, taking turns with naps, being security, keeping an eye on the crowd just to make sure nobody was getting unruly or if any problems arose. It was a pretty calm but very chilly night. I did feel somewhat guilty when I exited the vehicle in the morning, knowing all these hundreds stood in line all night in the cold. All the major news crews, reporters, and photographers were starting to arrive, including the helicopters and planes filming the crowd as they eagerly waited a 9 a.m. opening. Some cameras were set up in the store. We had WGN radio playing in the store. When the 9 o'clock time tone sounded, my uncle said, "There it is, open the castle doors." I had the special honors of opening the door. You can see my hands with the keys unlocking the doors in the news video. I actually had a little trouble for some reason for a few seconds. My key was not working well. All I thought about for those few seconds was the key better work or I will look like a fool in front of all the news cameras and everybody would hear about it the next day from all my friends. The cold, the tired, but excited and determined customers started to quickly stream in with instructions where to find the dolls. Of course, we had them in the back so they wouldn't cause a jam up at the entrance. It was pandemonium, but controlled. Nobody really got crazy and caused problems. Another huge success. Back to story time. This one is part of the Cabbage Patch phenomenon. It's a perfect example of the craziness that was going on due to it. I call it the case of the kidnapped Cabbage Patch dolls. One day in the 80s, I was working with my father in the store after the holidays, with many days after the big sale, but the demand was still high for the dolls. At the time, I was working a few nights as the manager with all the responsibilities that came with it. My father was scheduled for a rare night off. He told me he was leaving and I was in charge. But he mentioned a delivery was coming that contained some of the dolls. He told me to just unload them, do a good inventory as always, store them in the stockroom, and we will get them priced in the morning and put them on the shelves. So shortly after he left, the truck arrived. I heard the dock bell ring, went by receiving, took the pallet jack, and unloaded the boxes. If I remember correctly, there were about $6 in a box. So the boxes were rather large. After I finished, I did my inventory, one short. That was not a really rare event to have an incorrect count on a shipment of toys, but it usually was a clerical or shipping error, and it would get straightened out. So I mentioned to the driver he was one box short. He said, not to worry, just sign the paper. He was running late and in a hurry for his next stop. I said I could not do that. I counted again, same number. Then he then got pretty nervous as I signed the paper as one short, took my copy and gave him his. He angrily grabbed it out of my hands and started running to the door. I did not get good vibes from him. I knew something was up, so as he was quickly getting into his cab, I went outside, which he didn't realize. I noticed on his seat another box. I quickly ran back in, called my father at home. I told him I think the driver was stealing a box of dolls. He told me to hang up and call the police immediately. While I was doing that, I could hear the driver grinding his gears, trying to get out of the dock as fast as possible. I told the dispatcher quickly what was going on. Now, I could not see what transpired after that because I was not near a window, but was told later. Just so happened that one of Oakbrook Terrace's finest was cruising through our lot just doing his checks. He got the call and saw the truck barreling down towards Castle Drive, the only way in and out. He blocked the entrance with his car as the truck slammed on his brakes and skidded to an abrupt stop. The officer approached him, and the driver made up some really wacky story that the trailer must have been full and they loaded the last one in his cab. Really? Come on. Finally, he admitted to it. I don't know if he was arrested, but we got the kidnapped dolls back. In the late 60s, the family owners were starting to think about the future of the carnival business. The three original sons of the Dispensa and Sons Company, Joseph Sr., John Sr., and Paul Sr., had worked as children all the way through into their 50s and 60s. After much discussion between themselves and the other two owners, Nicholas and John Jr., in 1970, the decision was made to start phasing out the carnival division and develop an on-site amusement park. It would still be an enormous responsibility and effort, but it would make it easier for them now that the transportation aspect was being removed and less work needed to constantly move the equipment from our location to a carnival site and back home and out again over and over all summer, year after year, like it was for about 50 years. They had dreamed about their own park for years. We played almost every town there was in the Chicago area, as well as a few in Wisconsin and in Indiana. Hundreds, some were just once or twice, and some were annual for decades. Some were just a small church event with one or two rides. Others were giant, like the county fairs, which hired several companies to supply dozens of rides, because not every carnival company had every ride requested. The county fairs were what I call carnivals on steroids. They were not just like most carnivals that went 2 or 3 or 4 days. They were 5 days and took several days to set up as opposed to a normal carnival that was usually done in one day. Just like today, besides the rides and games and food, they included attractions, demonstrations, exhibitors, concerts, rodeos, demolition derbies, beauty pageants, farm animals, contests, and more. Instead of a few thousand customers like a regular carnival, they would attract tens of thousands. They were sort of the precursor to today's festivals. DuPage was my favorite. I could talk for hours about that one. So a 5-year transition plan was installed. In 1972, the Kiddie Kingdom plans were designed. In 1973 and 1974, construction was done. In 1975, we took about a dozen rides and retired them from the carnivals and put them in the park for the first year. Some of them actually were eventually removed and put back into the carnivals for a few more years. That year and the next 2 were extremely difficult, trying to simultaneously operate carnivals, an amusement park, and a toy store. But as 1976 and 1977 progressed, we were able to wind down with the carnivals and build up the park, adding more rides and buildings. Years later, doubling the number of rides, adding games and stores. The final year of the carnivals was 1977. It was a very tough year in so many ways, including sentimentally, but we were still involved with the amusement industry. The millions of miles spent on the roads for the last 59 years, reaping all the rewards, including putting laughter and joy into the lives of millions, came to an end. The Dispensas finally arrived home at last. Just like the castle and carnivals had their promotions, so did Kiddie Kingdom. We had several commercials, both for TV and radio, for the store and park. Media changed a lot since our first Hollywood exposure when Coronet Educational Films produced an educational documentary in 1956 that was soundless but narrated by a guy that gave it a feel like it was actual acting. It was called The Carnival Comes to Town, featuring some family members. It was one of those corny black and white films that us middle-agers remember that we watched in school in the 1960s and 70s. It followed our carnival as we drove in, set up, operated the carnival, tore down the carnival, and drove away. I own one of the few known existing original copies of it. Just like I mentioned earlier about the Castle of Toys jingle, that also applies to the Kiddie Kingdom jingle. Not doing it, no how, no way. We instituted the biggest coupon deal around. Not only were the ride prices cheaper than anywhere else by far already at 6 rides for $1 originally, but with a coupon that was published in several local papers on a weekly basis, you could actually get sometimes 8 for $1. It was huge. Almost everybody was coming in with these coupons. We heard stories where they would drive around and look in garbage cans so they could hopefully find a rare paper that the coupon was not cut out of. It was another huge success. We basically invented a kid's birthday plan. For $2, they would receive a hot dog, drink, dessert, a Kiddie Kingdom crown, and 10 ride tickets. Nobody else had anything like that, not just amusement parks, but any type of business. Not bowling alleys, movie theaters, or restaurants. Nobody. Now everybody has them. They were served out of our unique round concession stand. That type of food structure was unknown at the time. It was our idea to make it more convenient for customers to purchase food, then sit down to enjoy it with more space than a traditional square type of building. That actually worked out in some ways, but in other ways it didn't. We also implemented another of our unique ideas, the Kiddie Kingdom Club, and for the toy store, the Royal Modelers Club, the Royal Doll Club, and the Royal Inventors Club, which won a national award. The free membership included a newsletter, coupons, event invitations, meetings, and more. It was tremendously successful, as tens of thousands joined, never done with a retail or amusement business before. We also hired Franzen Brothers Circus to put on a circus on our property for 2 years. It broke the all-time attendance record for the circus company and increased our Kiddie Kingdom attendance as well, which was the goal. In addition, during the holiday season, some family members would sell natural Christmas trees in our lot. As customers filled their cars with toys, they would also tie down a tree to the roofs. One idea we had back in 1970, I believe, but haven't been able to confirm the year, was to perform a test market to see if the amusement park would draw the crowds we hoped for by hosting our own carnival on our own property. We had a fireworks show during the Independence Day weekend to go along with the carnival. It went well and was the deciding factor to go ahead with the park. But flashing back to the 1970s, if not for the foresight of the village officials approving the zoning variance needed to operate an amusement park, thousands never would have had the opportunity to experience it. When the public hearing was planned, there were so many residents that showed up to voice their opposition to it. The meeting was postponed and had to be rescheduled to a different date at a different, larger facility. The residents were afraid of the unknown. They thought it would create tons of garbage, attract rats, and be a hangout for unruly persons. However, the officials knew our great reputation of being the safest, cleanest, and friendliest carnival company anywhere. They also realized the potential tax dollars it would bring to the community. It was approved with a 1-year trial. The following year, after the residents had the chance to visit the previous year, not one resident attended the meeting to oppose it, and it was approved again. We hosted on August 16 through 18, 1985, the Oakbrook Terrace Summerfest in our parking lot, as the castle's final days came to an end. It included a concert with several groups, including the famous Jim Spider and Snakes Stafford. All right, how about some Dispensa trivia? Now, most of these facts also include a story, but unfortunately they would just take too much time tonight to discuss them at length, so I'll try to say just a little bit about each one of them. As I mentioned, the castle only stood for 18 years, not very long for that iconic building. It was more than a toy store, it was a landmark. It was, as we described it in our ads, toy-mendous. My mother, Dolores Dispensa, who passed away in 1996, gave each of my brothers and I a brick from the castle after it was torn down. She put a little plaque on each brick that says, "In our hearts, our castle will stand forever." Well, that for sure is correct, but physically the castle still stands today, in part. The basement is still there. It's a little complicated, but I'll do my best to try to explain. Basically what happened was when the developers that bought the property to build the current tower started to destroy the castle, they left the basement as well as our next-door underground garage and workshop, which was also our truck parking lot on top, and the warehouse building that was built after the castle that was rented out to Sears and also used by us for a while as a garage and workshop, intact. But the castle basement was reinforced and used for office space underground, and above ground parking, and still today used as the tower's loading dock, which it was for us. The 5-acre Kiddie Kingdom land was dug out, and an underground and above ground parking lot was built there. So from ground level, looking at it now from the west, all you see is the tower and that large former Sears warehouse. But if you drive around the back and lower to a different grade level, you will see the former castle loading dock and also the garage that no longer is accessible from the outdoors. So technically today, if you were able to get approved access, you could walk all the way from the inside of the old Sears building, through our former garage, through the castle basement, through the parking garage, and into the tower, through the underground entrance. About a half-mile walk, never once stepping outside. It's like an underground world down there. The castle consisted of primarily unpainted cream-colored bricks, but now you can see that they're painted a gunmetal gray. Alex, I will take criminal activity for $500, please. Back in 1957, our new original store we had in this village, Discount City, was robbed by what the county police named the second floor gang. They would break into homes and businesses in the area to the upper levels. They did that with us by chiseling out bricks, then climbed in and broke open our safe and register and stole $2,500. They left their tools behind, but I don't know if they were ever caught. In the days of the castle, we had a few incidents. One of the soldier heads was stolen and found by police in a field. First of all, it would have required some very acrobatic individuals to pull that off, no pun intended. Then to carry it over a fence and through a field had to be very difficult. So we speculated one of four things possibly transpired. Either they got injured and gave up their attempt, or they were spotted and took off, or had a car parked somewhere else and realized it would not fit, or they just ran out of energy and quit. My guess is the last one. Around the time the castle was about to close, or just did close, a person, or most likely multiple persons, torched off the enormously big and heavy metal castle drawbridge chains and stole them. We had our suspicions who did it, but had no proof. Who knows, maybe someday the evidence will show up. One year in the 1970s at our Berwyn Carnival, the famous St. Laurentana Italian Festival, which still is growing strong, and one of my favorites, during the middle of the night, somebody came in with a truck and crew and stole every wooden horse off of a merry-go-round with no witnesses. To perform that kind of crime took a lot of planning and guts. You had to have guys that were either in the industry or were taught what was needed to accomplish that. Most likely it was a group that was trying to make some cash on the black market, as hand-carved wooden horses like that were becoming very expensive and very sought after. The horses had hidden identifying marks, so if found, we could identify them, sort of like a serial number. Still to this day, when we come across a wooden horse, we attempt to check for the mark with hopes of finding those horses. A few tragic events. We had a Ferris wheel that was destroyed by a tornado at one of the carnivals many years ago. I think it was the 1940s. We have a picture of that. Also on September 1, 1961 at 2:40 a.m., TW flight number 529 took off from Midway en route to Las Vegas. 6 minutes later at 2:46 a.m., it crashed in a farm in cornfield in Clarendon Hills, right next to what is now Willowbrook, and a massive fire through the fields ignited. It was at that time, in terms of number of deaths, the worst airline crash in the country's history. All 73 passengers and all 5 crew members died instantly in a massive impact, dismembering every one of the 78 persons, including babies. Then the fire burned their remains so bad it was difficult to identify anybody. Fortunately, nobody on the ground was killed. Not even any buildings were damaged. Some of the remains ended up at Westmont's fire station, which was used as a temporary morgue. Firemen, police, and even local citizens all pitched in to help in any way they could. And unfortunately, even some local scavengers were caught attempting to steal personal belongings of the passengers. Some firemen from as far away as Wisconsin came to help. We currently live just a few blocks from there. It is now a residential area. Every time I drive by the former site, I think of those poor souls who lost their lives there that day. So you may be wondering how our family was involved. That evening, as the plane flew over Hinsdale, I was a 9-month-old infant, asleep with my parents in the Hinsdale home. I do have what I consider a good memory, but not quite that good to remember that. However, I was told the story later as a child, and there's info you can find if you look it up. My father awoke, as well as thousands of local residents, to the horrific thundering sounds as it resonated through the air for miles. Shortly after, my father received a call from his father, who was living where my father lived as a teen, just a few doors down. Authorities requested our company to bring our searchlight trailers, which were originally United States Army property, to search for enemy planes during wartime. We purchased and converted them over for our use to attract customers to our carnivals. They needed them to light up the area so it would be easier to search for any possible survivors and for wreckage. So family members, including my father, who was only 22 at the time, drove to Oakbrook Terrace, hooked up the lights to trucks, and drove down Route 83 to the crash site. My father told me it was without doubt the worst thing he ever witnessed in his life before and even after the day. There were so many body parts lying around, he or anybody else could not avoid stepping on them. As long as we were on that subject, I recall American Airlines flight number 191 heading for Los Angeles crashed at O'Hare on Friday, May 25, 1979. That also at that time, and still is, the worst crash in USA history, as all 271 persons on board plus 2 on the ground perished. I was working outside at the amusement park. At 3:03 p.m., the plane started its way down the runway. It crashed almost immediately after takeoff. A huge fireball and plume of black smoke rose to the sky. I did not see the plane or hear the crash, but I did witness the smoke and knew something terrible must have just happened. One of the really amazing aspects to our business popularity is even after all these years, we run into so many people that remember the castle or amusements we provided to the public. We must have heard hundreds of times over the years, even now, when we pay for an item in a store with a charge card, or when we have to do some type of business over the phone, etc. Dispensa, are you related to? We know instantly how the sentence ends. When we answer, they always thank us for such great memories of growing up, experiencing that opportunity of laughter and fun. But it wasn't until about 10 years ago or so that we realized how far geographically the memories traveled. My wife and I took our children, who now were adults, on a little family weekend vacation to central Wisconsin, to an indoor water park, just to get away for a few days and have a little fun. When my wife and I checked in, a somewhat younger woman who was working at the reception desk said to us, "Welcome, Mr. and Mrs. Dispensa. I hope you enjoy your stay." I was wondering, would you happen to be related to? Before she could even finish the sentence, my wife and I looked at one another with a look of amazement. Wisconsin? The woman went on to tell us how she grew up in Wisconsin and her parents would take her and her siblings down to Illinois to visit us annually and how much she treasured those memories. As I mentioned earlier, we had several different names that we used to label our carnival business as it expanded over the years. Well, the same was true with our last venture, Kiddie Kingdom. When we developed Kiddie Kingdom, several companies spun off the parent corporation of Dispensa and Sons as separate but related corporations, such as Dispensa's Concessions, which was owned by my Uncle Nick and his wife Sandy. It included some games, also Dispensa Games, owned by my father and mother, which also included some other games. Some of the carnival games also were operated like that. When the building in back of the park was built, it was called Tot Town. It included a candy store, Queen's Candy Kitchen, which later was revamped into a pizza and snack parlor, a toy and clothing store, Toy King's Workshop, an ice cream parlor, King's Ice Cream Kingdom, and an indoor movie theater, Kiddie Cartoon Corner. Those businesses were part of the Kingdom Enterprises Corporation, which was owned by my father and his brother, my Uncle Nick. The movie theater attendance never achieved the level we had hoped for. Kids just had no interest in going into a building to watch cartoons when all those rides and games outside were calling their name. So we converted that into a dark ride. We built the tracking cars and controls and installed storybook character scenes along the way. We named it Storybook Land, another world's first. It was a difficult ride to operate since there were several cars to control at the same time, but it was very popular. We left no stone unturned in expanding our business. During the last few years, we developed our own brand name of toys, called Toy Castle Toys. It consisted of primarily novelty-type toys such as balloons, yo-yos, etc. We sold them in the castle as well as to civic organizations such as schools and churches that were used at events like parties and fun fairs, etc. We have been doing that for years with these groups, but now with our name on it, they suddenly became more popular. Growing up in the business, it blessed me with so many memories, but along with that came responsibilities. My brothers and I were raised by my parents in such a tremendous way. My mother did not grow up in that family business world. My father, on the other hand, lived his entire 46 years in it. So when they met as teens and started to date, my mother very quickly learned what it was like. They married young at ages 20 and 18. I was their first child, born about 9 months later to a 19-year-old mother, a Florida honeymoon baby. It was one of their marital goals to raise us and teach us all the good characteristics that children should possess, and also to keep us grounded in attitude. And they also wanted us to experience as normal of a childhood as possible. And we also had the business side of our lives. We learned early that our lives consisted of two halves, personal and business, but we never really thought of it that way. The business life just seemed normal to us because we found a way to blend those two halves together. We still were students, we were still in Little League, we were still Boy Scouts. We knew other kids, including our friends, didn't have that kind of lives, but we did. So we knew they really couldn't not relate to us, but it didn't matter to them or us. And as we matured, it was evident to them we were just like one of them, only living half of our lives away from home with the business. We treated them like we wanted to be treated, and they treated us the same. Even though I was at the carnivals as an infant and young child a lot, it wasn't until about age 8 that my career as a carnival and toy store employee emerged. I started to help the family with simple tasks such as filling up the tents with stuffed animals for prizes, stocking shelves with the toys, and dozens of other things. Not getting paid, just learning it was not all fun. It was work as well. As I got older, more responsibilities were given to me. At age 12, I could perform so much more, helping operate the carnival rides by collecting tickets from the customers and bagging the toys at the cash registers, along with dozens of other jobs. I also, along with my brother Randy and a couple of my cousins, were used to dress up as the Wizard of Oz characters for a castle promotion. I was a Tin Man. I remember being so hot in that costume, and I had silver paint in my face that when I was done and tried to wash it off, it would not all come off. Somehow I was given the wrong type of paint. I went to school the next day with a silver face as my classmates were looking at me like they just saw a ghost. But now things have changed. I was getting paid, not with an official payroll check, but I was getting paid. When I reached the age of 16, the business world windows were really clear for me. I was already setting up and tearing down the carnival rides and a salesman in the castle hobby department. In fact, I may have sold Bob an electric race car or two. And now, not just dozens of responsibilities, but hundreds. And now I was receiving my first official payroll checks. When I received my first check, I think I just stared at it for hours, thinking of all those years that my ancestors put so much time, so much blood, sweat, and tears into the business. I learned quickly, though, that the work was not always enjoyable. The injuries, the long hours, the hot sun, the many, many hours. The cleaning of restrooms were all part of it. One of those responsibilities was the most feared of all the responsibilities of any carnival or amusement park employee that ever lived, the job of vomit cleanup crew. I can't tell you how many times I was summoned with a bucket of water because some kid decided to eat 3 hot dogs with everything, then go on back-to-back tilt-a-whirl rides. By the time I was 20, I knew how to operate every ride we owned and was training the employees on them, managing the castle on some days, doing a little office work, and just about anything that was needed. My business life was just about complete. Even though the family owners and operators of our business were all blood-related, there were so many others involved in it over those years. It existed for 66 years, but technically you could argue it was 67 because one of those spun-off companies still existed for another year. And my brother Bryce, years later, sort of resurrected the business when he purchased a new trackless train, like you see at the malls and other places. He called it Dispensa's Kiddie Rentals. From 2002 through 2016, he would rent out and operate the train at birthday parties, church picnics, pumpkin farms, etc. He even did it one year at our block party and once for our Westmont Museum event, so you could argue it was 82 years. Eventually, Joe Sr. and Paul Sr. retired, then shortly after, John Sr. retired. Well, sort of. Technically, he did, but he was still active, helping out where he could, whenever he could. It was in his blood and could not walk away from it. Nicholas and John Jr. were now the remaining owners. In 1984, the Kiddie Kingdom closed and an auction was held. In 1985, the same fate occurred for the Castle of Toys with its closing and auction. The two of them, with their father's input, decided it was time. Their property value had skyrocketed quickly. They made a business decision to end their long run, despite that it was the most emotionally difficult days of our lives at that time. We were no longer going to experience working together as a family. We were no longer going to see the joy and happiness in all the kids. We were no longer going to make history, but we will always have the memories. Over those years, we had approximately 36 relatives, most of them blood-related, work with us. Joe Sr. and Paul Sr. had several children work in it. And so many wives, aunts, uncles, sons, daughters, grandchildren, nephews, nieces, and cousins and in-laws. Throwing in hundreds of employees that were friends or neighbors of ours. It was truly a family business in every sense of the word. It was all of them that made this business their success. I hope all of you enjoyed your long ride through the history of the Dispensa business empire. Please come back again. Thank you. Any questions now? Oh, thanks. Questions? Any questions now? Or?
Thank you so much, John, for your family's history. I'd like everybody to enjoy some cake over here, coffee, water. Oh, John, you want to do some questions?
Yeah.
Does anybody have any questions?
Any questions by anybody? Or?
I think we covered a lot here. There's one in the back. What do you got?
Why can't we say any ride quarter, 6 for $1?
So, White, can you repeat that, please?
I said, why can't we all say any ride quarter, 6 for $1?
All together?
Oh, sure. I'll sing quietly.
Let's all say that together. Any ride quarter. You got to sing it. Come on. You got another question? Yes.
I have a question about the tilt-a-whirl. You see those at all the carnivals, and I look at it like, how do you put those on a truck? So you did that. How does that collapse so quickly?
Well, everything comes in the floors were like sections, so they were stackable, and the cars each came off, and then they had the fencing. So it's like a puzzle. Most of the rides are like puzzles. You just learn how to put them together and how to take them apart and stack them in the truck properly.
Yes.
What would you say is your most important piece of memorabilia, either you personally or to your family, that you still have?
Well, I actually have a piece of that original Ferris wheel that my great-grandfather started the business with. It's like an axle lock that locks the Ferris wheel together. That part comes off, the whole Ferris wheel falls apart. So the paint's not too good on it, but I still have that.
Great question. Yes.
So what happened to the soldiers?
That's one of the questions everybody asks all the time. We had 8 of them at one time. 6 were in front of the castle, and 2 were extras. 2 went to Thumb Fun Amusement Park in Wisconsin, and they recently closed. I'm not sure where those are at now. One of the other ones was some couple somewhere has somehow acquired one of them and they rebuilt it and repainted it, but they painted black where there's blue, so it's like black and red, not blue and red. The other ones I'm not sure where they all went. Then Rocky Hayes here in town my brother and I went to verify that they were ours, and they were ours, 2 of our original soldiers. I'm not sure. It was a long story that Rocky could explain, but his father was involved, and they found him somewhere in the garbage or something, so it's an amazing story. But.
And we're lucky to have them on our display. Yeah, that was a treasure to find. Yes.
Hey, you were saying about your carved horses from the married run were stolen. Did you ever find any of them?
No, never found them. But like I said, every time we go somewhere, we look. You never know.
That's unbelievable. Do you know where those came from?
Where the horses came from?
The horses came from?
I'm not sure. It might have been an Elmhurst merry-go-round. I'm not positive what company that was that made that particular one. But
Any more questions? Yes.
And where did the rides go? When they were
after Kiddie Kingdom
Yeah.
auction, they went all over the world. I mean, some were, like I said, closest, in the Chicago area. Some went to other countries, and they're all over the place. My brother Randy likes to research that part of the business, trying to locate where our old rides are, soldiers, things like that. And sometimes you hit something good, and other times it's difficult to try and locate where the trucks went.
How many rides were at Kiddie Kingdom?
When he opened up, it was 12. When he closed, it was about 24, 25. So we got like double the size, because we took some of the rides that were in the carnival, and we brought them into the amusement park. So.
Is that picture there from 74, 5-ish?
Could be. It's one of the earlier ones, yeah. To know some, but yeah, it's about 12 rides there, and it doesn't have that pavilion we built in the back later. So.
How about where did the train go?
The train went to Thumb Fun Amusements in Wisconsin. They bought 2 soldiers in Door County, 2 soldiers, the train, about 3, a scrambler and 3, I believe 3 kiddie rides. So we took our children up there when they opened up, so they could experience that since they were born after the business closed, and never had opportunity to do that. So we took pictures up there, but now that park is closed now. So.
The train's in Canada right now.
You said the train is in Canada now. Does anybody have any memories they'd like to share with the group here? Anything that they may have experienced at the Kiddie Kingdom?
Good evening. Thank all of you for coming here. Obviously, Dispensa and Sons have made a special mark in your hearts, because otherwise you wouldn't be here. So thank you for coming this evening. My name is Phil Dispensa. Joe was my father. He was the president of Dispensa and Sons. And then my Uncle John and my Uncle Paul, they were the 3 major dispensas that carried this carnival business to where it was today. I just thought I'd hit on some of the lighter things, what it was like growing up being a dispensa. A lot of people think, boy, you must have had it made, you got to ride all these rides, you got this whole house of toys, and it was just the opposite. We didn't get to ride the rides unless there was no paying customers, okay? And, starting out in the beginning, each of my uncles had a carnival of their own. We always put up at least 3 carnivals, sometimes 5, a week. My Uncle John would have one with his popcorn trailer. My dad would have one with his popcorn trailer. And my Uncle Paul would have one with his popcorn trailer. So we always had 3 units going per week, sometimes 5. It was grueling, it was hard work. Nothing was trailer mounted at the time I was working there. And, they were just the hardest workers I knew. They worked day and night. It didn't matter if it was 110, didn't matter if you were freezing, didn't matter if it was raining and there was a kid running around with a ticket in his hand. They weren't going to close till they got that last ticket. The amazing things were when we'd set up and tear down, we'd set this Ferris wheel up. It was like an antenna in the lightning storms. They thought nothing of it. So I'm lucky I didn't get hit by lightning setting up a Ferris wheel. When I was very young, the business always came first, okay? The family came second, okay? So when my brother was born, my dad was running the Ferris wheel, my mom was in the popcorn trailer, so my dad, he couldn't leave the carnival to go with my mom when she was gonna have my brother, so he had to stay, run the Ferris wheel till the carnival closed, and then he'd go see my mom at the hospital. But it was different. When I was a little infant, you know, there was no babysitters, you know, we always were at the carnivals. And in the popcorn trailer on the wheel well, that's where I was placed and stayed there for the entire evening, because that was the only thing. Wrap me in a blanket and put me on the wheel box, and you know, people would go, "Is that a real baby or is that a doll?" No, it's a real baby. So, you know, in addition to that, you know, I'm laying there as an infant. Here comes the DDT truck, spraying the grounds with all the DDT. Then on top of that, it was cool. The popcorn popper had a little heating element underneath the stainless steel tray where popcorn was put. And that's where I was bathing and getting warm, probably getting radiated by So I got some issues, and that's probably where they come from. That's where, but, no, it was an interesting life, you know, when I was in grade school, school didn't mean anything to them. They, like we said, they only got a 6th grade education, if that. And they were brilliant. They were brilliant. My Uncle John, like John said, he was amazing. Yeah, he was dyslexic. He couldn't read. You know, he couldn't give you directions to anything. If you were gonna get directions from him, it's like, you go down this road, count 3 mailboxes, turn to the right, you'll see a big tree, keep going, you know, and that's what the directions you got. But, you know, after school, when I was in grade school, you know, they wanted you to come and work with them, you know, there were always stuff to do, you know. So, you know, after school, I'd go change my clothes and go right in and give them a hand. It was everything from grinding welds and painting or refabricating, metalworking. They did it all. They did it all, just like John had said. John there. But it was an amazing growing up. There were no, you know, you weren't allowed to go out for any sports in school because they needed you to work, you know. It was, I don't know. This is my cousin Robert. His mother was my dad's sister. And I don't know, you probably have a few things you'd like to say.
Set them up, tear them down, buy the trucks home, or assign trailers.
And when we had the fairs, we would set up 15 rides at the fair in 9 hours. So and then going back to Dispensas, you know, I was running the scrambler at DuPage County Fair, and my Uncle John comes up and he's leaning on the fence, he puts his foot up, and then he comes over and he says, "We're gonna mount this ride this winter." And sure enough, that was the scrambler, the world's first trailer mounted, just like John said. The first one to innovate a tractor where it would go down flat to the ground, the gooseneck would lay down, and that way the sweeps and stuff could clear. It wasn't such a high step that, you know, kids and people couldn't get into it. But one thing after the other was scramblers and octopus and roller coaster and rollerblades. And I mean, we used to crank these rides up, the center pole, we would open them up, and you know, we would have to block and tackle, and all the workers would get together. We'd pull up the center poles and stuff, same with the Ferris wheel. Everything was block and tackle, everything was muscle, you know, it was. But eventually, they really, you know, they really engineered everything into portable stuff. One thing with Dispensas, I'd see other carnivals and stuff, and I'd see them tearing down, and it's like they're taking everything down and they're setting it on the ground, you know, and I'm thinking, because Dispensas, they wouldn't handle anything twice, you know. They would refabricate the truck and mount it so that when you took the merry-go-round horse off, it went right onto a rack. When you took the Ferris wheel seats off, it went right in the semi on a hanger. Everything had a place, everything was put in its place, nothing was handled twice. It was, you know, it was a lot, it was a lot.
Kid, first part in,
Yeah,
the last part out, last part in was the first part. We just kept the trailer, just kept going.
and then, and last story, because I know it's getting late, but when, you know, my dad would always say, watch me, you better watch me, because you're gonna have to drive this truck someday. So, you know, 13 years old, I'm driving this semi.
We were at the police station, right?
Yeah. At the time, Dispensas was self-insured because there weren't these big lawsuits like there are today. But they would put me, because they knew I could drive. They knew I knew how to make wide swings and everything with the truck. So they would put me in between my uncle and my dad or something, so if I should run into somebody, it was their own equipment. So there was no police call, it was not. But luckily, I never had an accident like that. But, you know, when we would, on the first day, you know, when we would advertise that we're gonna be hiring all these, we hired nothing but high school and college kids, okay? So all these kids, I call them kids now, but, you know, they'd all line up, and then my Uncle Paul, he'd go down the line, okay, I'll take you. Yeah, he'd pick out his crew, and then my dad would pick out his crew, which was 4 guys per crew, you know, 4 or 5 guys. And my Uncle John, he'd do that same, but they were looking for guys that were built and had the muscle and could put up with the grueling putting up and tearing down of the carnivals. It was fun, you know, I gotta say it was fun. I miss it. It was a part of my life I wouldn't give up for anything. It, like John said, it is in our blood, you know, there's something about, you know, the carnivals and stuff like that. But, and anyway.
We didn't have one saying that our Uncle Paul used to say all the time,
Yeah.
don't grab the grease.
Don't grab the grease, that's right.
Grease all over the ride.
Thank you so much for sharing that.